On day 1, a man with blonde hair and blue eyes with a thin stature wakes up from his bed in a prison-like room. He says aloud, is anyone... I don't know where this is. I don't know where I am, he says, worried and nervous. Hello, my name's Steve, he continues as he exits the prison cell-looking room. He hears another voice coming from the room besides his. Steve? Oh golly, that's funny, says a man as he makes his way through the hall, an open ceiling room with lights hanging from it. The other Steve, who is of much bigger stature, introduces himself as another Steve as he folds his arms in his orange prisoner uniform. The thin Steve asks the other Steve if he has any idea how they got here, and the bigger Steve replies that the last thing he remembers is that he was in his room at the nervous hospital. The bigger Steve would really like it if he could go back there. As they stand in the eerie hallway where a huge gate stands before them, they are met with a clanging sound. It's the noise of the gate opening. Another man with a blonde beard roars and runs into the gate. The big Steve hides behind a wall, and the thin Steve is confused about what's happening and raises his voice in confusion. Whoa, says the thin Steve in awe. I don't know who he is, but I don't like him. Please don't let him hurt me, he says, the bigger Steve. The bearded man yells, "Death to the warmongers!" as he grunts. The thin man wonders if they should help him out, but the bigger Steve says that they should stay in their cells. If they make too much noise, they might give the Steves the hose. A dog barks and their attention diverts it. The bigger man, shocked, sees the golden retriever also wearing an orange uniform like everyone else. The bigger man reveals that he has only dogs in pictures since his father never let him have one. Hey there, that's a good dog. What's your name, boy? Asks the thin Steve as he looks at the dog's collar. Steve, you're not gonna believe this. The name on the dog's collar is Steve, says the thin Steve, and as he checks up on the dog, they hear a man in pain coming from outside the gate. The bigger Steve, who's still hiding behind the walls of his cell, points out that there's a conveyor belt on the floor. The conveyor belt, right in front of the gate, rolls the body of the bearded Steve back inside the hallway. The thin Steve wonders if the bearded man has died. The bearded man grunts in pain lying on his back. He's not dead, says an unknown voice from the shadows of another cell. He's not dead, just stupid, says the man as the thin Steve watches him sitting on his bed. The gate slams shut and the thin Steve asks the man in the darkness, Hi, who are you? Don't tell me. Ask him what he saw, says the muscular man in the shadows. Obstacles. The exhausted bearded man lying on his back responds that there are obstacles outside, and he climbed over a few when suddenly lights started flashing in front of him. Then somebody hit the bearded man. He never saw it coming. The bearded man explains that his opponent was driving a Mack truck. See, I told you we shouldn't leave our cells, says the big Steve. Hello, will someone please tell us why we're here? Yells the thin Steve in a fit of rage and confusion. The muscular man in the shadows calls all the other Steves stupid and says he doesn't know about the rest of them, but this is exactly what he himself deserves. This place right here is hell. Day 2 arrives and the gate clangs open yet again. The bearded man yells, "Death to the military-industrial complex!" as he runs to head outside the gate. He screams and yells again on repeat as the others are in their cells. The thin man eats his canned food while observing the bearded man. The bigger Steve looks quite sad and depressed as he sits on the floor of his room jumbled up. The bearded man gets conveyed back to the room just like yesterday. The dog Steve looks at the bearded man as he calls the other Steve cowards. No, pal, some of us are something much worse, says the muscular man, sitting in the same place as always in the shadows of his room. Day 3 has come and the bearded man once again is all hyped up. He yells, "My name's Steve Rogers, and I'm a political prisoner because I refuse to take part in your illegal war. You fascists will not break me!" The thin man finds it very odd that all the people present here are named Steve Rogers. The Big Steve adds that the dog's name is also Steve Rogers, the dog had told him. The dog tells the Big Steve that none of the Steves present are in the right universe. The dog is scared. He's never been around any two-leggers except in a zoo. The Thin Steve asks the Big Steve what is the last thing he remembers before waking up in this horrid place. The Big Steve replies that it was a usual night. He was crying under the covers, thinking he was dead, and then there was someone in his room. He couldn't see them, but he knew they were there. The next time Big Steve woke up was in this hell. The Thin Steve, as he leans against the wall, reveals that the last thing he remembers is that he was working. He was drawing pages for Tales of Suspense. He thought he heard a car pull up outside his home, but he lives on the 34th floor of a building, so that's not quite possible. As the gate clangs open yet again, the bearded man stands in front of it ready to run outside. The Thin Man admits that maybe he is right about what the muscular man said. Maybe this is hell. The same thing hits the bearded man again. It almost takes his head off this time. He expresses his disappointment as he lies on the conveyor belt with a bloodied nose. On day 4, the same happens. Nothing moves as fast as the bearded man's opponent outside the gates. The man is determined to get out no matter what as he spits out blood. On day 5, with his face bloodied, the man reveals that his opponent bounced off the walls and still hit the bearded man. It was impossible. On day 6, with an even more injured face, the bearded man has a cut on his right cheek, and he's missing one of his lower teeth. His eye is all swollen after getting beaten up, and both his mouth and nose are bloody. The bearded man reveals that he saw them this time, his opponent. He saw them right before. There's just one man out there. One man. That's all that stands between the prisoners and freedom. On day 7, the Thin Man asks the bearded man what he saw this time, and the bearded man tells the other Steves to go outside and see for themselves if they want to know so bad. "Get out there and see for yourselves," yells the bearded man. On day 11, the bearded man, with his clothes ripped apart and very injured, gets ready to head outside again. The dog barks at the bearded man, not wanting him to head out into danger. The big man, Steve, reveals to the bearded man that the dog says he shouldn't go. The bearded man's going to die. The bearded man yells that it's better to die out there than in here with the other gutless Steves. The man makes sure that the muscular Steve in the shadows of his room hears him and makes it clear that he's nothing like the rest of the Steves present in the room. "Yeah, got that right," says the muscular man sarcastically. The door clangs open and the big man wonders if he should try and stop him. The dog also barks and the big Steve decides that he should just stay in his cell. As the bearded man runs outside, the Thin Steve also makes his way outside. The big Steve is shocked and yells at him to stop, but no one can stop the determined Thin Steve. Later, the conveyor belt takes the duo back into the building. "What the hell was that?" asked the confused Thin Steve. "Told you, couldn't even see it coming, could you?" says the bearded man. "No, but I did see something," says the Thin Steve as the duo lay on the conveyor belt with bloodied faces. Later, Thin Steve scratches something onto the wall of his cell using the top of a can. On day 12, the bearded man is joined by Thin Steve, and both of them yell as they head outside the gates. Followed by day 13, the dog notices something odd in Thin Steve's room. But the big Steve tells the dog that they don't know what Thin Steve is drawing in there, but he thinks that they should be good and stay in their rooms. The dog is resistant and keeps barking. The big Steve is confused. Day 14 arrives, and the duo is now joined by the dog to head outside of the gate. It's day 15 now, and the big Steve is angry. He calls all the other Steves bad as he sits jumbled up in his room. Day 16, and the bearded man, Thin Steve, and the dog seem to have made a bond. They make a plan that today the dog will go left, Thin Steve will go right, while the bearded man takes the middle. This time they decide to flank their opponent since there's no way he'll be able to hit all three of them at the same time. Later they're conveyed back into the room, and they wonder how their opponent hit all three of them in an instant. Day 17 has come, and on his bed, with a blanket atop, Big Steve tells the dog, No, you're wrong. I'm not strong. I was never strong enough when Daddy would. Please, leave me alone, Steve, he yells. Day 18, and the old muscular man is sitting in the same spot in his room yet again. The bearded man stands beside the muscular man's doorframe and says, "You know something, don't you? You know what's out there. They say what you're afraid of." The bearded man explains that he has no idea what's out there, but what he is actually afraid of is what's in here. He says as he points at his head, the muscular old man with a receding hairline and a patch on one of his eyes. On day 19, the bearded man is on all fours doing push-ups. The thin Steve draws on his wall while the dog rips apart the edges of its mattress. "You can do this! You're stronger than you think! We all know that! We all see it! I don't understand how or why, but I think the dog was right. We're all the same man deep down inside. So that means if we can be strong, then you can too, because we're all Steves. But you've been through the most, endured the worst, and you still have the biggest heart of any of us. That means you, Steve, could still be the strongest Steve of all," said the thin Steve to Big Steve as he pats his back. Day 20 has come, and this time, everyone but the muscular man heads outside the gates all hyped up, but they soon get conveyed back to the prison. "You're a bunch of idiots, playing at being soldiers. Not a damn one of you knows what you're doing, but I'll give you this. You Steve's got guts. More than most, and maybe guts are enough. Maybe we're more alike than I thought," says the muscular old man as he comes out of his room for the first time. The other Steves look at the muscular man in shock. The man is of a huge build and has the American flag tattooed on his face. He has knives coming out of his hands like X-Men. "God help us. Tell me everything you saw and I'll tell you how we're gonna get the hell out of here," says the old man. Clang! The door opens on day 33, and now all the Steves unite and head outside the gates where there are multiple obstacles in their path. Cannonballs and every obstacle imaginable. The place is surrounded by barbed wire fence as all the Steves dodge and make their way through the obstacles. The old man tells all the Steves to be ready. The big Steve explains that there are 5 opponents this time. They wonder what to do this time. "This is our moment, Steves!" yells the thin Steve. The 5 opponents throw their shields at the Steves, and the thin Steve tells the others that it's time to reach out and grab it. The others comply and put their hands in the air, awaiting to capture the shields. As all of them await their shields, a scene is shown. On the wall of Thin Steve, there's written how many days they were here and marks that Steve Rogers was here. The Steves yell in joy as all of them have the Captain America shields in their hands. With all their shields having different symbols imprinted on them, the Steves stand guard and an unknown voice speaks up. "Congratulations on Steves! You all just passed the first stage of your boot camp, but let me tell you, it only gets harder from here. Because there's a war to fight, and we need every Steve Rogers we could get," says Captain America, with all the other captains accompanying him. Someone viewing from afar says, "Not enough." "I don't know. I mean, we got Weapon America to finally pop his claws again. That's not nothing," says another man. "We will need more," says Ghost Rider, who doesn't find the progress of the Steves enough. "Let's hit the road. Loki, what else you got?" says Rip Hunter. Loki replies that he's detecting Steve Rogers' energy on Earth 49978. Local records show he has never lifted his shield. Instead, he becomes a drifter who was accidentally caught in a gamma bomb explosion. "Ugh, that's a Steve we definitely need to meet. Fire it up, Robbie. We got an army to build," says Rip Hunter. The drawing that Steve was engraving in his room was of the Captain America shield all along.